All right, guys, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and today is the first of the month, August 1st, right? So we've got, we're through July. We've got another new month ahead of us, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But, certainly a very heavy day in terms of market events, right? We got through Apple earnings last night, which were pretty good. For as good as Apple was, it's always, the market just feels like it always does what you're not expecting. You would think Apple goes up, the market should rally off of that. Not so much. Wasn't much of a reaction overall. So, the market kind of continues to be tricky and to really throw people off a little bit. But so a couple things to kind of talk about. I've been talking a lot about, obviously, I went through a lot of the moves last night. So I try to do a little bit of these calls. I try to make them a little bit educational as well, and not just about all the movers and so forth. And so one of the things I would say for coming into the beginning of the month, August it's a little bit of a quieter month. I know it's a little bit of a seasonally weaker month. And we went over all this, by the way, at the end of the day in the trading room. So if you're hearing me talk about it twice, you don't have to watch this video, but it's a little bit of a repeat of what I talked about. So it's a little bit quieter of a month. It's a little bit of a seasonal weak month. However, just as I said with Apple being up big today, you would think that the market would have been up. It's also sometimes it could be a little bit more volatile than expected August. I see some people talk about that, Wall Street is off. That's not exactly true. I can tell you from my experience being on a trading desk, nobody is off the whole month. It doesn't work that way. People rotate around. Usually trading desks, depending on what type of a trading desk, you have a team, right? So you could have 3 or 4 different senior traders. Sometimes if it's a little bit of a bigger desk, you could have 7 to 10 traders. And I will tell you, everybody does not go away on vacation. You split it up. You're a team, right? So a couple of people take off the week between Christmas and New Year's. Not everybody could take off that time. You rotate. Even if you're like the super senior person on your desk, you don't get to pick, the same week. You rotate. It's like I said, saying the same thing over. But so people do not take off the whole month of August. That just doesn't happen. Also, everybody has mobile access as well. So nobody is really, unless you're doing like, vacation where you have a couple days and you're going away to Europe or on an island or something like that for a couple days. Most part, everybody still has access. So don't let that kind of sway you into thinking. And by the way, I think it's a great time to take vacation. I will be taking some vacation off in August, but don't think that things crawl to a standstill in the month of August. That's not true. Another example is people always think the day after Thanksgiving is going to be a low, nothing goes on that day. That's not true. Sometimes the day after Thanksgiving can be a huge, fun day to trade because there's volatility, and things will move around a bit. So keep that in the back of your mind. Also, company buyback plans will start to come back on, who have been in quiet periods as we start to, get through this big week of earnings. So just keep that in mind that all these buyback plans should be coming back on. So, in seasonality, I always kind of put as kind of the last thing that I'm always thinking about. It's kind of in the back of my mind that some months are stronger than others seasonally, but, overall, it doesn't necessarily mean that August is going to be a weak month. All right, so I think I talked enough about that. I would say for earnings season, as we're starting to get through, I know if you've listened to my videos before, you've heard me say if you're a swing trader, it is a very difficult time to swing trade. And we're starting to come to the end of that. So, and it's also very difficult to tell yourself to not overtrade. I'm guilty of these things too. When we had the weekend webinar, I talked about I was talking about the difference between simulation trading and regular trading. If you had a couple losses here and there, if this was a tough week for you, make sure you learn from it. I had a couple great days this week. I had a couple bad days. So there's always things, no matter what your level of trading is, to improve upon and to realize where you made mistakes. I will tell you, instead of always talking about winners, I made a bad mistake on Baidu. right? I put on a trade into, I was looking for a run into their earnings report for Baidu. I did not get that. And, I said, well, I'm down in the position. I might as well not take it off here. It's already marking at a loss. Let's see what Baidu does. And, Baidu got smoked today. We got a little bit unlucky, but that's how it goes. So you have to stick to your system. I do not, 90% of the time, I do not hold positions into earnings reports. Either a swing trade or this was not a swing trade. This was a move, looking for a move into earnings, which I did not get. I mean, clearly, I think I put the position on in here, and it did nothing but go down. So, this was a big loser for me. And you have to kind of keep. So in hindsight, what's to learn here? Number one, you know, maybe position a little bit lighter than I did if I was looking for a run into earnings trade. I actually own calls outright instead of call spreads, so call spreads would have been better to do. And then I should have just bit the bullet and probably taken the trade off yesterday going into earnings. So you know, this happens in trading, and you have to be a little bit more disciplined. The more disciplined that you can be in this game, you will find that, and the more consistent that you will be, rather than trying to get a big winner here and there on something like this, on holding into a bend, you have to keep that in mind. All right, so names that had earnings, which there's a lot, so I'm not going to go through all these names, but Tesla I think was implying a 9% move, which is a big move. So I don't think they got that. I think if you sold premium, it is on the highs, so I can't roll that out yet. So it's up to 317. I think they were implying a 9% move, which would get you up to about $328. So the options were really expensive for Tesla. Again, I think a lot of people don't talk about that when they say, "Oh, look at the stock; it's up after hours." Well, really, how are you going to play it? Because the options, there's no free lunch. Some of these options are extremely expensive. So if you held on to stock, which is tough to do in a $300 name for something like this, but if you did, congratulations to you. You got rewarded by it. But again, just because a name goes up, you have to realize how people were playing that. Square was up 3.4%. Their numbers looked okay for Square, but maybe I think they ran up a little bit. I had a cash position in Square. This one I did the right thing. I took off half going into earnings. A couple other names that right off the bat that reported. Bloomberg is always slow, so I'll have to wait till that comes up for Bloomberg. Cirrus Logic had good earnings. I think they were up, unless they come back in. Same thing with Qorvo. I think Qorvo lowballed their numbers. Again, for these earnings reports, it's always not how they executed last quarter, but what their future guidance is. And they usually give more details about that in their earnings call, which is very important to listen to. But two names that had great quarters last quarter, and it kind of felt like that's what today some of the earnings reports look like. A lot of weak guidance for the next quarter. So it kind of makes you think about things a little bit. That either people are just lowballing their numbers for the next quarter, or maybe they're thinking that there's a little bit of weakness coming. Because I see that all over the place. Hubs is another one, I think, where they guided down a little bit. So keep that in mind. We went over all these names after the close in the room, so I'm not going to go over all these names. Best performing sectors today. By the way, I didn't mention the Fed meeting today, but that's always an overhang for the market because people don't know what they're going to exactly say. They were not expecting a rate hike today. There was Fed Fund futures were not expecting a rate hike, but it's pretty much guaranteed that they're going to raise rates unless something crazy happens for September. The way that they're pricing those in. They talked about kind of the same things. In every Fed report, they talk about the jobs, they talk about growth, they talk about inflation. So they're talking about more gradual rate hikes. So they're going to be tightening. And it looks like September will be the next rate hike. All right, so that's it for today's video. I know I'm not capturing all the moves for the day. The option activity, there was a lot. I feel like I'm missing some trades here, which I'll have to update my sheet. But again, a lot of stuff going up. It's the same story. Most of the trades that we're seeing going up, like Ring is a nice one. This one also aggressive, bought, but you look and they either report earnings that day or they report earnings next week. So it's still very, very noisy in terms of option activity. A lot of rolling of positions, like a big roll in Microsoft calls. Keep in mind they took off yesterday. I know that this was mentioned today on one of the financial networks, but keep in mind they unwound a big position of Microsoft and they did not roll calls yesterday. So you kind of have to look at what they're doing over the last few days. So there was a big roll today, but yesterday they just straight unwound calls. A big order in Halliburton going out to January, which I thought was interesting. There was also an interesting. Somebody asked me on the internets. They said, "Hey, did you see this big SPY order?" Yeah, there was a nice looking SPY call order. It's really tough to analyze SPY flow because, in my experience as a trader, and I think a lot of funds, they use SPY for hedging, not for their alpha. Right? It's their beta. Right? They're usually hedging. So they did buy calls in this. So you could speculate maybe somebody wanted to get long S&Ps, which there's a million different funds out there. Um, there was these SPY puts that went up earlier in the day, but there's a million reasons why people use SPY. So yeah, maybe somebody's looking for more upside. But again, very difficult. Even when I go over the ETF fund flows, I try to weed out what happens on a day-to-day basis for SPY because it's really noisy. It's the biggest ETF out there. It's the most frequently traded normally. So there could be a lot of reasons why somebody uses SPY, but this one looked like it was bought. All right, guys. So that's it for today's video. Have a great night and see you tomorrow.